Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I absolutely love this course. This is something that I created with Anand many years ago, actually, because we realized that there wasn't really formal training for PMs. A lot of people were getting thrown into the role. Some people were lucky enough to be part of an APM program, but most people were learning it on the fly. And the reality is, product management is so different across companies, even across teams. And so we wanted to really distill what we wish we had known, 15 years ago when we first started our careers in product. And so we created this course really to distill those frameworks of, what is product management? And also then how do you go and become a great PM? What are the foundations? What is the product development journey? And how does that look? We created this course with that in mind. And over the past 5+ years at this point, thousands of people have taken this course. But the reason I'm actually really excited about this fall is because we've actually gone through and really revamped it. Because the reality is, as I mentioned, product management has been different across companies, different across industries, but it's also really been evolving over time. And I would say that especially with AI, there's a lot of changes, which is what is the role of product management in a world where, AI could write the PRDs, where, the designer can go use ChatGPT and go create the spec. Like, does that make the PM role irrelevant? Today in a world where building AI technology is actually really interesting and different and hard in the sense that, sometimes you just got to get the thing out there. So I've talked a lot about this concept of like minimal lovable product. What is minimal lovable product in a world where you actually have to ship the thing, get the data, make the thing better, and then actually have it maybe be lovable? So I think a lot of these concepts have added even more complexity and nuance to a discipline or to a craft that is not necessarily black and white. And so that's why I'm so excited about this fall course. Today we're actually going to do a little bit of an overview in terms of like what is the product development process, how do we think about it. I want to be able to like distill that framework for everyone attending this webinar. And then I'm really excited to be here with Samir as well. As you see both of our kind of like backgrounds on the screen, we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A where we go into some of those questions. And I think the last thing I'll say is I really welcome any questions that you all might have. So drop them in, we'll pull them. Samir's going to do a great job kind of pulling from both the ones we've prepared as well as what you're submitting to make sure we have a really great dialogue today. Okay, so that's the agenda. And again, those are the intros. You guys can all read the screen. And so I want to go straight into, what is the product development process? The product development process is we've really broken it down into these 4 stages. And, I think you'll hear lots of frameworks and in other places, Scrum, Agile, so on and so forth. But I think those are a lot of times just a lot of semantics and complication in terms when really it's these 4 things. What are they? The first one is what I call feature opportunity validation, which is, do we even know that we have a user problem and a business opportunity in front of us? There are so many, not even projects/products, I would say so many companies that go awry because they do not do this well. They assume that a user has a pain point that they ultimately don't. Or they do have a pain point, but they don't have a willingness to pay. And if you actually look at the history of companies across, the world and across history, you literally see this over and over again, where the best companies, the ones that survive and thrive, they're the ones who really are able to get that right. A really enduring core problem that they have a great solution for, and a way to monetize that in a thoughtful way. And so, really talking about what does that mean from a company all the way down to a feature level. Have you really validated that there is a problem to be solved and an opportunity to be captured? That's week 1. Of how we talk about this course. And specifically with regards to AI, I think you actually do see a smattering of companies that are not necessarily rooted in this concept these days. I think you see a lot of AI for X, AI for Y. And if at the end of the day, if 2 things don't exist, the first one being, this is not a real user problem. It is just hey, cool, this is a nice application of a thing, but people don't desperately want this thing that you've built, or they don't desperately have a problem. You are going to end up in a situation where it's like, great, we built the AI for X, but no one's using it. Right. I think that's one. And then the second piece of this, again, especially with AI in mind, I think this idea of like, where is your real business value to be captured? What's actually going to be commoditized by a lot of the platforms out there? Is this so and so startup going to survive, or is it just going to be part of OpenAI? Just hypothetically speaking, I think there's a lot of that I think that if you're equipped with that language and that thought process, you're able to evaluate not just the projects that you're working on at a given company. Let's say your manager comes and is like, I've got a new idea. You're going to do the AI for X. And like, I just want a chatbot interface here. And you're going to be like, is that actually what people need? All the way to picking your companies, picking the companies that you want to be at, that you want to work for, because you believe that they really have this first piece right. All right. The second piece of product development is really, after you've validated the future, the future opportunity, like there's something here, a problem and a value to be captured, you need to go from point A to point B, which is, I know what it is that my users are needing to, I have a solution that is the easiest, cheapest, but also most delightful way to solve for their problem. And so in feature design, we talk a lot about what does it mean to diverge thoughtfully as opposed to diverge and just feel like you're throwing spaghetti on the wall. Converge quickly, right? How do you prototype in today's day and age with all of the tools out there? Again, just thinking about the AI concept, like what does that look like when it comes to getting feedback on your prototypes? Do you actually go out to real humans? Do you use tooling? What does that look like? There's so much interesting stuff in flight today. So that's really feature design. How do we actually design this solution? Then you go into feature development, which is ultimately you are going from a lot of what I call discovery in the first two phases into delivery, meaning you got to build this thing, you got to ship it. And for a lot of companies, you have to make it production ready, scale ready, so that it doesn't fall over when your users start to use it. And what does that look like? And also, how does feature development change today, again, where everyone can wear an aspect of the PM hat? And so I think another thing to stress is this course isn't just for people who are either in the PM seat today, or maybe even aspiring to be PMs. There's actually also really helpful for people who are in other functions. If you're an engineer, a designer, an analyst, part of BizOps, how do you work with the engineering product design team, and how do you take on some of the things that typically come up in that development process? And then finally, feature launch and iteration. This is so interesting, which is, I have a saying, which is the first version of anything you launch, there's probably a less than 5% chance it is the final version that is going to be what users really are using and loving. And that is because at the end of the day, the best way to really know if it's working is to get actual user usage on your feature. And so being able to launch that to the world, being able to be clear about what success looks like, and then iterating, which is an inevitable thing that you have to do to get to the outcome you want for your users and for the business, that is a huge part of the last last phase of the product development process. And so this is the overall process. And, as part of the course, we actually go really, really deep. There's a lot of really great case studies, async content that, all folks are able to access. And then as we get together in the live sessions, we bring guest speakers in who are doing this, every day as part of their jobs. Or like, what does feature development look like for Canva? What does feature design look like for Webflow as they gear up for Webflow Conf and they're about to launch some huge AI features? What does feature launch iteration look like for a Loom or Slack? Like, what does that look like? We bring a lot of those case studies so that we're able to bring some of these concepts to life. So with that, I'm going to end this framework piece because there's so much to go into on each piece that's really the purpose of the course. And then for the rest of this webinar, we actually wanted to just go into Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Samir.
All right. Thanks, Jay-Z. Thanks so much for sharing that. Super exciting. Hi, everyone. My name's Samir. I'm the TA that's going to be helping out Jay-Z with this course, and really excited to have everyone here. Wanted to spend some time with Q&A. So as folks think of questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A feature of Zoom. As folks are doing that, we gathered some kind of frequently answered questions about this course and wanted to ask Jay-Z what her thoughts are here. So First up is Jay-Z, what are some of the most critical skills that a PM should focus on mastering, especially when they're really early in their career or if they're switching over to PM? What are the big things that folks should be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Actually, Eleanor, do you mind helping us maybe pin both of us so that the folks can see both?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Um, Okay, so, I deeply believe that the most important kind of like skill, especially for early career PMs, is literally what I talked about, which is that product development process. How do you understand that process really, really well and be able to do that process in a way where you are getting the most impact with the least amount of your time? Because I do think a lot of early career PMs find themselves stuck in doing what I call like low leverage tasks. They are, sorry, one second. All right. They are essentially cleaning Jira or, a project tracker. They are hunting things down. They're filing bugs. Like, again, none of those things are not important, but it's really important to not lose sight of what you're actually trying to do at any given stage of a product, right? Or of a project. And so that's why we really anchor this course on that framework. Like that is the almost like the heart and soul of the course, because it's so important to be like, hey, everyone, let's take a step back. Have we skipped step one? Are you in a scenario where your founder or your manager has come to you with a solution and has told you to build the solution? You don't even know what success looks like, or there's misalignment on what success looks like. You don't have conviction that you're solving a real user problem. Have you even talked to any real users? Do you even know who your target user is? Maybe there's even swirl around that, right? And is there just clarity across all of those things such that you're actually going to be set up for success when you're in the solution space, when you're designing the solution? I find so many people getting thrown, especially early career PMs, or you don't even learn this early career and then it just continues throughout your career and you wonder why, you're burnt out and you don't get the results you want from what you're shipping, right? And so really being like, hey, where am I in this process? Have I skipped anything? Did I go straight into designing a solution? Am I just in execution mode? And I think I'm being useful, but at the end of the day, for product people, if you're at the end of the day for product people, you are always graded, always evaluated on outcomes, on the outcomes you drive for your business. And if you have not even figured out, or you've skipped the step of being like, this is a real problem for people, no one's going to use it. You've skipped the step of this is a real opportunity for your business. Even if people use it, your product is going to get shut down. It's going to be like, wow, you're racking in a ton of cost from LLMs. No, we're going to stop this project, right? And so that is the most important thing about your career and about being a great PM, which is understanding this framework and being able to make sure you haven't skipped a step in this framework. I'll zoom out a little bit because again, I think there's just this is such a rich question. There's so many other pieces to it. I'll share a little bit more here, and then if that evokes other questions, like please send them over to us. I think a lot of things are really important for PMs. Period. I think that PMs need to be highly, highly curious. And that curiosity, what does it look like? It looks like you constantly talking to your users. It looks like you constantly playing with products out there that is tangential or even directly competitive. It it requires you to be up to speed on the competitive landscape. That curiosity, that like constant desire to go out there and like play and interact and think about where is this going, that is a critical skill for a PM. The second really, really critical skill is communication. And I often say that that's probably the most important skill. I mean, you should do all those things, but like you could do all of those things and you could be a terrible communicator and you are really going to struggle as a PM. And finding your communication superpower, like, is it written communication? Is it verbal communication? Everyone is different. And I want to be very, realistic here. It's not like everyone can be amazing, super amazing at everything. So finding your superpower, being able to leverage that, lean into that more, and then also finding whether or not the company you're at is aligned with what's natural to you. And I'll give a very concrete example. At Stripe, the motive, like the way to the currency is essentially written communication. There's such a heavy emphasis on writing. And so if you are not a strong writer, you either need to get really great or at least comfortable with writing very, very quickly, or you need to really think about like, is this going to be a place where I'm going to thrive? And there are companies where the opposite is true, right? Where like they're very weak on documentation. They don't do documentation well, but it's incredibly important for people to be able to grab a quick, 15 minutes, like get the most out of like live stand up. Maybe you're back to an office culture. I think it really just depends. And so thinking carefully about your environment, your company, and then like what it is you need to do to really like flex to that audience. That's a really, really core skill.
I think that all totally makes sense. There's a lot of really great information there. We have a couple questions kind of bubbling up in the Q&A. So want to grab some of those. One is pretty related to this topic is thinking about folks who are making a career change. This question is coming from an attendee. They ask like, how do you make a career switch from being a project manager to a product manager? And I think we can kind of extrapolate on this going from there.
Yes, I'm super excited to answer this question, but I'm also going to answer another question in the chat, which is, is this, what are the other Reforge courses taught by myself, Jay-Z? I actually teach a really, really small, 2 times a year, cohort of 30 people course called Managing Your PM Career. And the reason I bring that up is because I actually feel like for people where that is their biggest question, how do I transition into the PM role? Or I'm trying to think about whether I stay at my company or I'm actually on the job market. What do I do? How do I break in? How do I, like that course I actually feel like is really perfect for those people where that's your biggest question versus I think this course is really perfect for people where it's like I'm doing the role, I really want to get my fundamentals right, or actually I don't even, need to be a PM per se. I am really trying to like figure out how to bring PM thinking to my work, right? Like, so I think or maybe it's even like I don't even know if PM is what I want to do. I want to understand what PM actually looks like so I can make that decision. And then I would go like take like the managing your PM career course. So specifically when it comes to the advice that I would give for people who are transitioning into PM. And I think this person is asking specifically about project management. The biggest change for project managers currently is something I mentioned earlier, which is you are not responsible for the task list. You are responsible for the outcome. And that is it starts with a mindset shift. It actually doesn't start with, here's like the list of things you should do, which is probably what, someone from that background would naturally gravitate towards. You're so strong at that. But the first thing I want to like almost like pull you back and be like, hey, wait a second, we need to first recalibrate the mindset. And the mindset is it's all about the outcome and it's not necessarily about the task list. And what you should then start to practice doing is how do I like, first of all, how do I even have a perspective, a point of view on the outcome? How do I have a point of view on all the different phases of the journey that I just mentioned? What is the user problem? Is it worth solving? What is the business problem? What does success look like? Again, I'm going like there's quite deep and there's so much more in the actual course than what I'm just saying right now. But at a high level, it's like that. And then, in designing the solution, how do you're not just doing the task, you're not just getting people together, you're not just organizing the sprint, you're not just taking the things that people have designed and like moving into engineering or making sure that engineering has the clarity of the box. Instead, what it is like, hey, how do I know that my constraints are correct? Have I done enough in my first phase to go into my second phase to be able to equip my designers to know what it is that they should be exploring and what parts of the solution space they should close off? That's the new kind of like skill set you will be flexing into in the product role as opposed to the project management role. And I think that when you have that mindset shift, when you start to recognize that this is the product development process, start doing those pieces, a lot of times like that is the easiest role to transition into product management because you have so many relationships on the team and your superpower is already the fact that you're probably one of the best executors. So then what I really would say is, you're probably great on the product on the execution one. So like call it week 3, module 3, but then how do you learn to get really strong on like modules 1, 2, and 4? I'll
I think
quickly
that totally.
answer a question that's in the chat. Is PM Foundations a good course for mid-level PMs to cover any foundation fundamental gaps? 100%. I do actually think that when people sometimes like skip this course and they go into, product leadership, strategy, or even like mastering product management, they don't have the common language at the foundations to really be like, okay, now we're talking about strategy. What what is that compared to, what it is that we think about when we think about the end-to-end feature development process, the product development process, the life cycle. So I really think this is such a critical course to take, and especially the content. Again, so much of it is going to be, you can access and kind of read through. And then when you do the live course, I think you'll really see a lot of it being brought out with the case studies.
Totally. I'm going to move on to the next question, but this is related to a lot of the questions that are coming into the chat. But we're talking about a lot of these core fundamentals and really learning the language of how the product development process works. How do you think about this when we are adapting to new technologies like AI? There are new models coming out like every week, every month. How do we think about all of that new information coming in and applying it to what we're learning here?
Yeah. I actually think that with all the AI stuff happening, it is so much more important to understand the fundamentals because I do see, and I mentioned this earlier, a lot of times people are skipping the first step, which is, by the way, the most important step with AI. You go straight into, well, our competitor did this, or OpenAI just released this, or Anthropic just released that, and therefore we're going to, slap a chat interface on. We're going to, use the new thing that just came out, and you're straight into, oh, let's like build, 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 and then at the end of it, you come out with. And I've spoken to so many companies and so many product people who literally have gone through this in the past 18 months. They're like, we went all out in AI. And at the end of the day, they're like, we haven't seen the benefits, not because there aren't benefits, but because of the way that they are approaching it, which is essentially they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to jam, 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 jam. Like it's almost like overnight, every product, you're like, those little sparkles, those are in every product, right? So it's like really understanding what someone struggles with is so important because you then are able to be like, this is how I can make their lives easier. It's not just about throwing in interfaces, throwing in sparkles, making AI this and AI that. It's actually being like the thing that was taking this person a really, really long time. I'm a Notion user, and sometimes looking at a Notion page is like looking at a blank canvas, and you're like, how do I start? That is an interesting opportunity for potentially AI, that first draft, issue. I'm writing a performance review, and again, this is where it's like, if you really understand the user problem, there's nuances. I'll give you an example. Like you're writing a performance review. Of course, the same core user problem I described with Notion exists, which is like, there's so much to have to like figure out to even get started. But what is the implementation of that? It's not just I push a button and I just like get text and therefore I edit it. It's, hey, I probably need to go pull from systems that have data about this person's performance. And by the way, it probably differs by function, right? And then also you don't want to take away the personal feel. If you put AI everything in, like, let's say a performance tool, you don't want to take away this feeling from employees that like this was just written by AI. So like my manager doesn't actually spend the time on my development. So I think that nuance, I'm just giving you like a very lightweight example, is brings us back to this concept of, do you really know who you're solving for, what their core pain points are, what, in the case of the performance review thing, what really turns them off even, right? And then how do you build products towards that, leveraging the technology that is out there? So I would say, the biggest thing is, I think in today's world, the fundamentals are even more important because I see so many people totally skipping the first steps and going straight, or not knowing how to iterate. And then the second thing I'll say is, I think, Samir, a little bit to what you're alluding to, is the change, the pace of change is incredibly rapid right now. And so I think that the skills I mentioned, the softer skills, like that curiosity and the communication, that is even more important because, if you don't have the curiosity, you're going to fall behind. You're really not going to know what's going on, how people are using things, and what new technology is actually out there. And then communication, again, even more important. You will never be the expert. I would say that, you're seeing a lot of companies where there's actually a team that's just like the research team. That is a new thing. And that research team, if you thought engineers were technical, that research team is even more technical. And if you thought, if you've ever had experience where you're like, hey, my engineer does not fully understand the problem we're trying to solve, they're more just like kind of waiting for me to define it for them. That actually, I've personally seen that be even more amplified with researchers, right? They're so deep in the technology and they're so far sometimes removed from like the user problem, and it almost feels like it's like technology first. And that's okay in the sense that like that is their job. Their job is to push the technology, but it makes your job even more important, which is your job is to then be able to be so close to the user, so close to the business that you can then say, great, the technology is doing this. Here are the applications versus getting pulled along by the technology, being that anchor that is deeply rooted in the user and the business.
Totally, that makes a lot of sense. I think a slightly different flavor to this question is like when we really dig into some of the things we were talking about with like, let's talk about like feature opportunity development, for example. A lot of that requires like getting to, starting to do user research and like doing some of those interviews. I think folks are curious about like how does like AI tools change that space? There are a ton of like transcription tools out there. There's a ton of use cases for things like ChatGPT or Claude to kind of analyze these interviews. Do you see a path forward there for how PMs kind of interact with those tools when learning these basics?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that over the past, I don't know, 20 years, the whole trend is things that were really hard have become easier. Things that were very tedious have become easier. Back in the day it was like, well, doing infrastructure was really, really hard. And then you have AWS. And then you doing all these things were really, really hard. And you have all these no code platforms, right? Or like all these things to make your life easier. And that is coming into a lot of things that happen around the product development process. So 100% Samir, the active research, it has been so tedious getting in front of people, getting the right people, getting the qualified people, the organizational tasks of setting up these interviews, doing these interviews, synthesizing these interviews. And actually, my general motto for AI is that's where it really shines. It's all the things that were really tedious that people don't want to do. How do you make it not? How do you actually replace that work with technology, right? And so I think 100%. I've said this in the past, but there are core things like, research, support. Those are the areas I think that are getting disrupted first. And I see this. I see this in the companies I consult with or I angel invest. I just see that trend where you're like, okay, it used to take me so long to go listen to every gong call and to like go through all the support tickets and then like talk to everyone on the team. And, a lot of times the tracking in Salesforce wasn't right. And, I'm left with like a data mess. And I don't walk away being like, I know what the insights are. I know what the inputs are so I can prioritize the roadmap. All of that is getting so much easier with the tools out there. And those are the tools that are probably making the most headway. Because it's not it's like a augmentation of what the human does. It's like the product is, and I want to maybe meta point. The product discipline is not going away, but a lot of the tedious things that product managers or product adjacent people do, that is getting easier.
Yeah, I think that that makes a lot of sense. I can see this extending even into spaces like feature design and like building wireframes like that gets so much easier as we have tools like FigJam and all this like really cool stuff that's being built. So with that in mind, I want to move to our next question, and I think this is on a lot of folks' mind, but want to hear your take on what's the future of product management what does it look like as we continue to see these rapid advancements in AI. You said yourself the discipline itself is not going anywhere, but it's going to evolve very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that. I think that what used to take a lot of time in product management is going to take less time. So the clock speed at which you do things increases, which I think, by the way, is super exciting. I don't think any of us, anyone going into product or been in product, you're not like, oh man, I miss like all that coordination, or I miss like digging through all this stuff. Or yeah, I miss like not having a design system, and waiting for a designer, and that designer doesn't have the components. Like none of those things you're gonna miss. That is the future that I see, which is super exciting. I do see some things that are also a little bit more like controversial. So let's talk about that. Um, and this is something I talk a lot about actually in like managing your PM career, which is, you know, there is a trend today where it used to be this like pretty clear progression in your career. You're like, okay, I am a APM, maybe not. That might exist for some people, that might not. Then you're kind of like, I'm a PM, and then I'm a senior PM, and then I kind of have a fork in the road. Like, do I become a group PM slash like ultimately like a director of PM, or do I like become just like a super IC? And a lot of times, actually, in the past, I see so many people choosing this fork where they're like, I want to manage, of course. Like that feels like the natural career progression for me to have like a couple of reports. And we had ratios. We had for many people in like tech, I would say you had exuberance and kind of like unconstrained growth. And so you just see companies grow really, really quickly. You see a lot of these layers being added. You see, excuse me, like one manager with two reports, or just lots of what I call like almost like middle management. I do see that starting to go away for a couple of reasons. The first one is this whole idea of efficiency is king. It's not headcount. Like companies used to wear their headcount as a badge of honor. They'd be like, you should join us because we're this like 2,000 person company. That means we're not going to go anywhere. And you're like, okay, that's sure, that's one measure, but it could also be like you're probably going to do the deepest riff, which we don't want, right? And so it's all about efficiency actually these days. And I think in the line of like towards this idea of efficiency, you see people being like, hey, actually, with the tools that we have, with the teams that we have, does it make sense to have that manager? Or does it make sense to have more of what I call like a player coach, where yes, you're coaching because you still need some kind of leverage. You're still training people up. You're still having people interested in the discipline, maybe coming from non-product functions, but you're definitely very rarely just being like, I'm a people manager, right? That is like taken over in engineering. I also think it kind of like has some kind of like resonance with what I'm sure everyone's talking about recently this week, with the whole like founder mode thing by Pete Paul Graham, and like how Brian runs Airbnb, but this whole idea of like getting really into the details. And so what I see is tooling is able to let you get into the details easier, because again, before, what would have taken you 1 week to collect all that data now takes you an hour or less, right? So like that enables you to get into the details way faster, as opposed to being like, now we just expect you to get into the details, and so we took 1 week and we multiplied it by whatever number of product areas, and now everyone's burnt out. And so I think that tooling is a way to really enable people to get into the details. And I do see this trend where it's all going toward, or it's going towards, you can stay as an IC longer. You can do more as an IC. There's less of a, I need to pick the management path in order for me to really feel like I'm growing. Companies are rewarding these like really senior ICs, letting them manage and mentor a little bit, but really not placing a ton of emphasis on the management. And again, and I would also say there's fallout to that, meaning, before, if we were all bad at training people to be PMs because a lot of this, resourcing doesn't exist, we're probably worse at it now because everyone's like, well, I'm busy doing, so I don't have time to even be teaching. And that is also why I think like, that's why I'm so passionate about Reforge, and why I teach at Reforge while having a full-time job. It's really because I just feel like this needs to exist. This needs to exist so that people are not feeling like they are just being asked to do more without the resources to figure out how to navigate it.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think it's been really helpful even for my own career, like just being able to take some of the courses at Reforge and learn a lot of the stuff from experts like you. So I want to go back to a couple of the Q&A pieces from the chat, and then we'll start wrapping things up. One of the things that I think folks are pretty interested in is there's this problem of kind of top down direction coming from management saying like, hey, AI is really popular and we got to start building, we go find a problem for it. How do you as a PM, maybe you're, in mid level or maybe you're a really junior PM, how do you kind of like go against that and say like slow down, like let's really think about this. How do you talk with leadership about that?
Yeah. I'll start first with, in general, my advice to product people is you're doing the act of like prioritization, which essentially involves quote unquote saying no, but you need to do it in a way where it's not like you're saying no because nobody wants to hear no. And in fact, as a business, if you're just like, saying no all the time, you're not moving. Right. And so I think really the art, I want to start with this idea of like the art is how do we say yes, but say yes to the right things and say yes faster with like more information so that we are more likely to be right. And like the things that we've said yes to are the things that are going to pay off. So I want to like start by that framing because I think that even for some people, that is really an important thing to keep in mind because they go from being like, okay, my job is to just like say no to these execs, which you might take away as like the thing to do because you're like, oh, well, they haven't defined the problem space correctly. To, okay, my job is to like guide our company to say yes to the right things faster and not do the things that we should not be doing. That's really the thing. And so with that mindset, again, I always want to go back to the framework, right? Like this is the feature development framework. And so I think it's really important to be like, okay, well, what's probably happening here? Okay, what's probably happening here is everyone is feeling pressure that if we do not experiment with technology, if we do not feel like we're kind of like doing stuff, we're going to be left behind. Okay, and what's really interesting is like everyone is a user. Your users that you build your product for are users. Your team is a user. Your exec team is a user. So think of everyone as a user. So you're kind of like, okay, like that's the real fear from, X person, my manager, the executive, the founder, whoever it is. When you understand that, you can actually plan a path forward, right? So with that, you can be like, okay, I know that everyone wants us to like experiment with technology. And I would first start with like experimentation is a really good thing. You do not want to be left behind. And so it's not like you have to like sit and really figure everything out before you get going. Going back to like it's all about yes faster versus like no, no, no. And so with that in mind, what I would encourage us to do is like a lot of companies, I say this, hey, we need to do the platform work so that we can experiment and use technology and use the latest advancements as fast as possible. And a lot of people, by the way, skip that platform work and it's, fine in the short term. It's horribly painful in the long term. Then I say, okay, great. So again, it's like, where do you sit? If you're a platform PM, you got to be like, you should be the one being like, we are going to build this technology. We're going to make it so that like, you know, it's easy for everyone to go plug in and use the models are out there. It's easy for people to go and like build their own little model and train. Like you should be like, I'm pushing the envelope on yes, 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 faster. And like I should be the one getting people to use AI. But then if you're a user facing PM, this is where I'm like, no, no, okay, it is your job to be like, I have to first understand step one, the 4-step process, 4-step product development process really, really well. Because otherwise, I'm going to get all my users, my internal users, my execs being like, do it, do it, do it. My platform PM being like, use it, use it, use it. And I'm just going to, be doing things. And at the end of the day, it's going to be like garbage in, garbage out. Like, I don't know, random AI stuff is everywhere in my product. So if you're a user facing PM, this is where I'm like, great. Like the momentum's all there, the desire is all there, like don't say no, don't stop it, but remember your job. Your job is to be like, again, who am I building for? What's really painful for them? How do I eliminate that work such that when people use this product, they're like, this is really amazing. And again, like as a user PM, you're thinking like, just even things like, what is the technological kind of like comfort of this person? So for example, if you're at Meta, I know this for a fact, like a lot of people that are using Facebook and they're like, oh, I'm really getting hit with like AI, but like it's super weird. Like I'm not sure what it does. And like it makes me really uncomfortable. Right. So like how do we say, hey, well, yes, AI is inevitable. Like, Meta can't not invest in it because that'd be crazy. Like they're literally gonna be so far behind if everyone else is going. But what does that look like for those users? And again, maybe it's, it's instead of for like like the billions of people that use Facebook, it's just like giant AI, like swirly thing. Instead, maybe the right thing to do would be like, hey, for people, like, let's segment. Here are the people that a Jay-Z like uses Midjourney to generate pictures for her kids. She's super into this because she can just like write things and get, generated stories. Great. And then let me maybe make that even more tailored experience so people can like really get the joy of that. But for someone else who's like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable with AI, what does that look like? Right? Again, Facebook is a product, a consumer product for billions of people. What does that look like? And so I just really want to push on this. If you're a user-facing PM, it's all about like understanding the nuances to be able to be like, well, this is the application, versus it being like, okay, great, I just did it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that concept of, being able to say yes to the right things at the right time is really the core of a lot of this work. So I know we're running up right against time. We got about a minute left. Want to hand it over to you. Just talk about any housekeeping things, dates for the course, where people can sign up, and then any other information you want to share before we close out.
Yeah. Well, actually, I might turn over to Eleanor on the housekeeping things, but I'll say just one last thing as we wrap up, which is, I really feel like this deep understanding of the product lifecycle is the foundation for everything. Like I still come back to this, and like I'm a CPO. I run not just product management, but design and research and data and marketing and all these other functions. And I still come back to this all the time. And there are so many moments where I'm like, I just missed a step. I went too far, too fast. Like I was that exec who then got really excited about this thing. Like I do it all the time. So I think it's just so, so important to really anchor yourself in the fundamentals of product because it is so applicable to every function and every level and every, whatever you want to call it. Like you're always going to come back to this. And so that is why, of all the courses I could be teaching, I still come back to this one because I think that that is how we can best equip people to be successful. So I think I'll just end with that.